Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a horrifying upload to share with you. Before we jump into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. Doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button. Takes half a second. And please leave a comment. Why? Well, because these things, they really do help the channel. And guys, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. I grew up in the small foothills of eastern Kentucky where folklore and stories of haints and mountain monsters run rampant. Everyone has that cousin or uncle that saw a Bigfoot while out hunting, or an aunt that swears she saw a ghost in the old high school that one time. So it's hard to discern what's the truth and what's fiction. Most of what I've personally seen or heard while out in the mountains, I usually attribute to local wildlife. I haven't seen anything that is unexplainable to my logical mind, not yet, but I'm also not arrogant enough to think that these things do not exist. By logic, we have to assume that 10% of all of these stories we hear are true, and those people witnessed something amazing and terrifying. In my small town, Dogman is a known perpetrator of many mishappenings. I've heard stories of it killing chickens, trying to bust down doors, attacking hikers, or just being a nuisance on someone's farm or property. Also heard stories of it stalking those that live deep in the woods, coming to stare into their windows at night, and even protecting them from strangers that made their way onto their land at some point. The majority of these people like to tell booger stories, as they say. They like having a grand story to tell people for attention or just pleasure of telling it. I'm not really sure which. But a few are trustworthy, and they are usually the ones that will only tell their tale if asked. My grandfather was one of them. Yes, I know I sound biased because it's my grandfather, but I have 6 uncles and an aunt that literally could make a living out of those lies they tell about local cryptids, and I'm more than happy to call them liars. My grandfather, though, he's a very logical man. He was a skeptic in everything cryptid, as well as spirits and ghosts, always looking for a logical explanation, and usually pissing off the storyteller as well by questioning everything. That's why I tend to believe him, because he never tried to lie to me and his other grandkids. If anything, he's always been the voice of reason we ran to when we were scared. When I was younger, I asked him if he had ever seen anything before, be it a ghost or a monster. I'd been hearing stories from my uncles all day about Bigfoot, haints, etc., and wanted to know his thoughts on it. He sat there for a minute, not even acknowledging my question, and when I was about to ask again in case he hadn't heard me, he spoke. When he and my grandmother had first bought our family homestead, they had heard fantastical stories about monsters that roamed that part of the mountains and how evil they were. My grandmother was a little scared, but my grandfather said he just shook his head and went on. He figured it was a few black bears that people had been hearing or seeing, or even some bobcat, and that he wasn't worried about. About 2 months into them living there, sure enough, he had seen a mama bear and some cubs making their way up the mountain behind his house, so he didn't think too much when he heard something pounding on his front door one night, scratching at it, trying to get in. He told me that he grabbed his shotgun before going to the door. He tried to look out the front window to see if he could catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever it was, but he could only see a large black shadow being cast on the porch. Being the fearless soul that he was, the man fought in World War II and was under General George S. Patton, so you can imagine what he has seen. He unlocked the door and swung it open, expecting a bear or even a person standing there. It was neither. What he saw that night still had him shook up when he told me this story, some odd 50 years later. He said that when the door swung open, he saw an extremely large creature standing there. It stood a good 6'5", and it was slightly hunched over as it stood on the covered porch. Its arms were long, the hands reached well past its bent knees, which were bending in the opposite direction of a human. It was covered with thick black fur, very dense and dark, and that it had a smell to it that was like a mix of wet dog and raw sewage. Lastly, the face, or rather the head, was what brought him up short. He said it looked like a German shepherd's head had been placed on a large, hairy, human-shaped body, and that as he looked at it, it cocked its head sideways and looked back down at him, its eyes showing fear and confusion. He told me that he pulled his gun up, and before his finger could hit the trigger, it took off, but not before he got off a warning shot, right in its right calf muscle. He said the howl came out of it when he shot it, scared him more than anything in his life had, and he ran back inside, bolting the door closed. He stood there listening as its cries and howls began to fade as it ran deeper into the mountain, until he couldn't hear it anymore before he moved away from the door and went back to his bed. He swore to me on all things he held dear that this thing would still show up sometimes, dragging its wounded leg across his porch as it came up to the door. But it never bothered anything again. He said it would come up to the door, sniff around before growling softly and then taking off again. He told me there are a lot of things in the woods that can hurt you, be it beast or a plant, and a lot more that can scare you. But the thing he saw that night was the scariest of them all, and that I'd best never go looking for it, because I would woefully regret it if I came across it. My grandfather has been gone for about 15 years now, and I still believe every word he told me that day. Does that prove the existence of such a creature? Maybe not. And the words of an old war vet wouldn't be enough to change the minds of some people. But to me, it's the realest story I have ever heard about the creature. I hope that someday someone can get an actual documented proof, if only to prove what my grandfather went through and what he saw that night. Today's second encounter. Now, I've shared this encounter once before on my channel, but I'm sharing it again because there is an update to it and I want everyone to be familiar with what he is talking about. A little background on me in that day. I work in real estate, more exactly commercial real estate. So my work takes me all over the place, from urban industrial areas to very off the beaten path secluded areas, farmlands, development lands, etc. On this particular day in October of 2012, my last assignment of the day was to go out and survey an old farmstead near Cayuga in Haldimand County, about 30 miles south of Hamilton, Ontario. This place had been vacant since the 90s. I arrived in late afternoon, I'd say 5:30-ish. The place was the last one on a dead-end country road and couldn't have been seen from the road. I went up the long driveway and proceeded to look over the place. There were 3 structures: the house, a garage, and a large tool shed. I walked around the front of the house, which was completely boarded up with no means of seeing inside. I proceeded around the far side toward the other buildings. The shed had basically fallen completely down, but the garage was mostly still completely up. I noticed around the side door huge scratches, and the door was half broken down but still held shut by a padlock on one side, and the middle and upper hinge. The bottom part was forced inward and the door and clapboards around it were covered with these scratches, but not like scratches a dog would leave. These scratches were huge and parallel but spread apart, almost like fingernail scratches, very deep, obviously put there with a lot of pressure. That's when I looked down and saw huge paw prints, but not regular round paw prints, almost elongated a little bit. The area around this particular broken down door was covered with these paw prints. If I had to venture a guess at how wide they were, I'd say at least 5 inches. I was wearing heeled dress shoes, and when I put my foot over the paw print, I could see the print on either side of my foot. I wear a size 10, so I don't have tiny feet by any means. I began to get very uneasy, and that's when I recalled noticing that all the sounds of the forest were gone. It was dead silent, and that's when I noticed the stench, like wet dog, urine, and feces. I mean, the whole area smelled rotten, like a swamp, rotten decay. But the smell was strong and very putrid. I got a very uneasy feeling, like all of a sudden I knew I wasn't alone, and decided I had enough and quickly headed back to my car. And that's when I heard something in the bushes, and it sounded big. It was going through the trees very quickly and hard. I got back to my car and locked the doors. When I started my car and turned my lights on, that's when I caught the eye shine in the trees ahead of me. But the eye shine was not at the level of a dog's head. It was a lot higher, I'd say 4 to 5 feet up, maybe even a bit more. I could not make out a shape as it was getting toward dusk, and so there was a lot of shadows in the trees, but I thought I saw a large figure in the trees, but I could not be sure. I started to freak out a little bit and decided it was time to go, so I backed around right into a wet, marshy spot and got my car stuck. I was more interested in watching this thing than where I was going, which was a mistake. My attention quickly went back to my car as I tried to free myself from the mud. When I looked back to where this thing was, it was gone. The spot it was, I could see further into the trees, so there was definitely something there, but I couldn't see exactly a shape, more so just a large shadowy figure. After several seconds of rocking my car back and forth, I managed to get it out and left very quickly. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. Like I said, I did not clearly see what it was, but I just had this intense feeling of evil. Something bad was there. I returned to that spot about 1.5 years after the incident, and the place is gone. Someone bought the property, tore it down, cut down a lot of the trees. To the best of my knowledge, nothing has been developed there. It's still just vacant. I've not told a lot of people about this because I don't want to be ridiculed or made fun of. A coworker of mine said it was probably a bear, but I know for a fact there are no bear this far south in Ontario unless it's in a zoo. Sale of some farmland nearby this on a Six Nation Indian reservation. Client was one of the few remaining pure-blood Native Americans. I'd put him easily at 80, if not older. I asked him about odd happenings in the area, like strange animals, and sort of told him my experience, not in detail, just that I was on the property. He responded with a question. You saw it, didn't you? He went on to say there are many things that are unknown to this world, but wouldn't comment further about my experience. Only said there is a good reason that particular place has sat empty and unused for decades. I had odd nightmares of that day for a year afterward, and I'm still very hesitant to do surveys in areas like that. After having my own experience, I have gained a new respect for these creatures. As I said, in my experience, I never clearly saw it, but there was definitely something there. Decades ago, my uncle and my cousin each had their own encounter on the same night. This is my uncle's encounter and one of my third or fourth cousins, although I never spoke to him about this. His account was only what my uncle told me. This happened nearly 50 years ago, but my uncle still remembers it clearly. I'll provide a bit of info on the area and our family. We lived in the family farmhouse with my grandparents, the last house on a dead-end country road. A small community of about 8 or 9 homes was referred to the locals as the Thames River Siding, but really it had no official name. That name derived from the close-by station name sign of the CNN Railroad. The road went out and met another road at a T intersection. To the right went over the tracks, then down through a ravine and out to the main country road. And to the left, the road went through some open fields for about a mile or so, then turned 90 degrees and went over a secondary country road where it ended again, very near another ravine on the left side. Our family had a band started by my grandfather. He, my mom, my uncle, and 2 cousins were in it. On this particular night, they had a meet for practice, which by 11:30 was winding down. Our one cousin left. The remaining cousin helped my uncle tear down and put away the equipment, while my grandfather tended to the animals, which seemed very spooked and nervous, which really wasn't out of the ordinary, as there was a pack of wild dog that made their way through every so often for a few years. The cousin left and headed home. His way took him out to the left at the end of the road, and over to the next intersection is where he had the first of the 2 encounters, but would not become known for a few days. My uncle left 10 minutes or so afterward, and on his way home took the right, over to the main country road. This particular night was either a full moon or very near a full moon, as my uncle said it was very bright. He crossed the tracks and went down through the ravine, and as he approached the stop sign, something in the field caught his eye. There was something large and tall standing sort of hunched over, staring intently in his direction. This happened just as he was on his brake slowing down to stop, but also staring to the angle of the car to the left-hand turn that was about to be made. His sight of this thing went from a glance to his right to over his shoulder, then to the rearview mirror as the car stopped. He sat staring for what seemed like hours, but was only seconds. Then this thing broke into a sprint directly at the car. My uncle said he was like in a trance of disbelievement, like his brain couldn't comprehend what his eyes were seeing. The field isn't overly a large field, but still would be 400 to 500 yards between the tree line and the road, and this thing covered it fast. My uncle snapped out of his trance and peeled out of there as fast as he could, watching in the rearview mirror the whole time. This thing was close enough to be illuminated by the taillights, and it was reaching out for the car as he peeled out. He said it ran on 2 feet, not on all 4s, or even partly on 4s, 2 feet. It had dark-colored hair, either brown or black, appeared to have a muzzle similar to a dog, and had pointed ears on the top of its head. The eyes appeared to glow a dim yellowish orange. He said one strange thing was he felt as if it wasn't looking at the car, but it was looking at him inside of the car. That was about as detailed as he could get, only seeing it briefly like that. He raced home and called back to the house and told them to lock their doors and stay inside. My grandfather asked why. My uncle just said, "Do it. I saw something in the field and I'm not sure what it was. Just lock up and be safe." That was the last and only time he saw a thing like that. Later, at the next band practice, my uncle and cousin were sitting outside having a smoke, and my uncle told him about what he had saw, expecting to be made fun of or called crazy, but instead, he said, "I saw something that night on the way home as well." As he was approaching the stop, something ran across the road in front of him, making him hit the brakes and almost skid off the road. He said he only saw it for a split second as it moved, but from what he could see, it looked like a massive dog or a wolf, but looked like it was upright on two legs. It could have been the way it seemed to bound or jump over the road. He more or less described the exact same thing my uncle saw. Whatever it was, it covered a good 2 miles, which included navigating some dense wooded area and a pretty steep-sided ravine in a matter of 10 minutes at most. It was that fast. There are reports of strange noises, like growling howls or barks in the woods along the Thames River, and around some of the farms in and around the time of the sightings. And he said there was some livestock found dead, partially eaten, but everyone tossed it up to being wild dogs that were around. But my uncle knows that there was no wild dog. No one else has ever came forward having reported seeing anything like that. Today's third part of the upload is a very interesting newspaper article that I found. Okozuko Alta. Some settlers armed themselves with courage and went out in search of a supposed werewolf, fearing that at night they would be attacked by the beast with rifles, machetes, and flashlights. Said hunters assured that they managed to wound him, but he managed to escape, leaving along way bloodstains. On the other hand, the municipal police telephone continued to ring constantly at night to report the presence of a supposed wolfman that threatens the inhabitants. So the insistence makes the security and emergency elements carry out patrols in aid of the population. And it is that security authorities affirmed that they have interviewed people who present their complaint to a command and refer to have seen a werewolf as they describe it, with a height greater than 2 meters and with fur similar to that of a dog. Have been given in the Mirador, Juan Sabins, May 5th, El Centenor neighborhoods, and the Al Arenal neighborhood, in addition to the fact that just at dawn this Thursday, the case reached the residents of the Al Aguarcero neighborhood. One of the testimonies was given by a housewife from the Al Arenal neighborhood, who requested the help of police in emergency, for which the Serva group made an appearance, and there the woman said the werewolf was at her doorstep of her house. The woman affirmed that the creature was a human appearance, but had fur of an animal, and that she saw him from the front wanting to carry a canvas that the family was hanging on the side of their home. So when she gave cries for help, she saw how the beast fled. While in the Al Aguacero neighborhood, families began to hunt the creature at night, as some residents said they had seen it, so many took out their rifles in order to eliminate it. However, inhabitants affirmed that it escaped, but they managed to wound it. Today's final encounter. Just to start off with, I've never believed in anything supernatural or paranormal. This is just too strange to explain. Some background, I'm from England and never heard of skinwalkers before a few weeks ago. I'm visiting family in New Mexico right now, and they live a couple of miles from what I was told was a reservation. My cousin had to go pick up a friend from said reservation a few days into my visit. He invited me to go along to see more of America. It was getting dark when we set off from the house. When we got there, we were invited into the house, and I met this friend's family who lived with him. It all started when I whistled for my cousin's dog to come over to me, and this friend's grandmother gave me a really weird look, like I had crapped in her cornflakes or something. My cousin noticed and said, "Oh yeah, you can't whistle in here. Not at night anyway." I thought that was really strange and obviously asked why, but the look on everyone's face made my cousin say that he'd tell me later. So anyway, we left, and on the way home my cousin and his friend told me about skinwalkers and superstitions, etc. I did not believe a word they said, rolled my eyes, and knew that it was just some spooky boogeyman superstition. However, a few nights ago, I was driving back from a supermarket with my uncle and saw something. However, on my way back to the house from the grocery mart with my uncle, I saw something I cannot honestly explain. It was late, but just light enough for me to see out the car window and some brush on the side of the road. I saw what I can only describe as a screwed up kind of werewolf. Let me explain. I saw it briefly, as it soon disappeared, but it looked to me like a half-rotten wild dog with humanoid features, such as human hair and eyes, except the eyes were bright and creepy. It was also running as though a human would if they were imitating a dog or a four-legged creature. What makes it creepy was that it was alongside the car for a few seconds, and as we turned left at the junction, it stopped in the middle of the road. I asked my uncle if there were any wild animals back there. I gave the general direction, where the right-hand road leads, and he said, "What, on the reservation?" The road was the entrance, basically, to the reservation. After speaking to my cousin, he said, "Maybe it was a skinwalker, trying to keep you off the reservation. If anyone has a logical explanation, please let me know." Alright guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Wow, what a fast week. We are already at Friday, coming into Saturday. Saturday, we've got a live stream and a couple good videos lined up. I also have a major channel update, which I will be doing on Saturday, because after that, as of May 1st, there is going to be some major changes for the better. So with that, thank you for all your support. It truly does mean the world to me. Without you guys, this channel would be nothing. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and may the Great Spirit watch out for us all. May He guide us down that path that we call life.